It all started with a feeling I couldn't explain. One look at my son, Max, and something felt off. At first I told myself I was imagining things, but the more I tried to ignore it, the harder it was to shake. And that was the moment everything in my life began to unravel. I'm Mark, 42 years old, a contractor by trade and a fixer by nature. I've been married to Anna for 18 years, half my life, really, and together we've built what I always thought was a picture-perfect life. We've got two incredible kids, Max, our 16-year-old artist with a mind that seems to work in ways I'll never understand, and Emily, our 10-year-old firecracker who could light up a room with her laugh. If you'd asked me a year ago, I'd have said we were the kind of family people envy. But now? Now I'm not so sure. If you'd asked me a year ago, I would have said our family was perfect. Sure, we had our ups and downs, but nothing out of the ordinary. We took vacations to the Keys, celebrated birthdays with homemade cakes, and too many candles, and spent weekends kayaking on the lake. It was the kind of life people envy, and I never took it for granted. But lately, something had been nagging at me. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on. Not really. Just a feeling, like a whisper in the back of my mind that grew louder when I least expected it. It always seemed to happen when I looked at Max. Don't get me wrong, Max is an amazing kid. He's got this quiet confidence that makes people gravitate toward him, and he's smarter than I'll ever be. But when I looked at him, really looked, I couldn't help but notice something. His face, his expressions, even the way he carried himself, it didn't feel familiar. At first, I brushed it off. Genetics are weird, right? He probably just took after Anna more than me. She's got those sharp cheekbones and hazel eyes, the kind of features that turn heads. Max inherited those, along with her artistic talent. He could sketch anything he saw, capturing details most people wouldn't notice. Me? I couldn't draw a stick figure to save my life. But the thought kept creeping back in, like an itch I couldn't scratch. When I watched Max work on his art, I'd wonder why he didn't inherit my knack for fixing things. When I heard him laughing with his friends, I'd wonder why his laugh didn't sound like mine. It wasn't just his looks. He was so different. The first time I mentioned it out loud was at a family dinner. Anna's parents were visiting, and the conversation turned to how much the kids had grown. Max has Anna's eyes, her mom said, smiling fondly. And Emily has your smile. Everyone laughed, and I joined in, but the comment stayed with me. After the dishes were cleared, Anna and I sat out on the porch with a couple of beers. I brought it up casually, not wanting to seem like I was overthinking it. Do you ever think Max doesn't look much like me? I asked, keeping my tone light. Anna shot me a confused look, then laughed. What are you talking about? Of course he does. He's your son. Her answer should have been enough, but the way she said it, quick, almost dismissive, didn't sit right with me. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was looking for something that wasn't there. Still, the doubt lingered. A few weeks later, I found myself at Max's parent-teacher conference. His math teacher, Mr. Walters, couldn't stop singing his praises. He's got a natural gift, he said, holding up one of Max's graded assignments. Most kids struggle with these equations, but Max breezes through them. It's like he sees the answers before he's even done the work. I nodded, smiling proudly. But inside, I felt like an imposter. I've never been good at math. Numbers weren't my thing. I spent most of high school struggling to get through algebra, and here was Max, excelling in a way that didn't make sense to me. Later that night, I told Anna about the conference. She beamed with pride, gushing about how Max must have gotten his intelligence from her side of the family. My dad was great with numbers, she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. It must have skipped a generation. Her explanation made sense, but it didn't quiet the nagging voice in my head. Every time I looked at Max, I felt like I was staring at a puzzle with one missing piece. I started noticing little things more often. His laugh, his mannerisms, even the way he tilted his head when he was deep in thought. None of it felt like me. It wasn't until the family barbecue that the doubts became impossible to ignore. Anna's cousin Karen had always been the loudmouth of the family, the one who drank too much and said things she shouldn't. That day, after her third margarita, she turned to me with a sly grin. "You've got a handsome boy there," she said, nodding toward Max. "He's all Anna, though. Not a shred of you in him." I laughed it off, but her words hit me like a gut punch. She didn't mean anything by it. Karen never did. But hearing it out loud made the doubt feel real in a way it hadn't before. For the rest of the barbecue, I couldn't stop watching Max, comparing him to Anna, to myself, to everyone else at the party. The more I looked, the less I saw of me. That night, as I lay in bed beside Anna, the thought kept circling in my mind. What if Karen was right? What if there really wasn't a shred of me in Max? I told myself I was being paranoid, that I had no reason to doubt Anna or our family, but deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. And once that seed of doubt was planted, it started growing roots. As Max grew older, the differences between us became harder to ignore. At 16, he wasn't just a boy anymore. He was becoming his own person. And the person he was becoming, it wasn't me. Not even close. Max had this quiet intensity about him, the kind of focus that made you think he could solve the world's problems if he put his mind to it. He'd spend hours sketching in his notebook or working through complex equations, completely absorbed in his own world. I'd catch glimpses of his work sometimes, drawings so intricate they looked like blueprints for some futuristic city, or math problems that made my head spin just glancing at them. "Dad, check this out," he said one night, holding up a sketch of a sleek bridge spanning a gorge. "Do you think it'd work structurally?" I stared at it, impressed, but completely clueless. "Looks great," I said, "but you might want to run that by your math teacher." Max just grinned. "I already did. He said I'm ahead of the curve." It was a proud moment, sure, but it also hit me like a reminder of how different we were. I wasn't the kind of guy who could design bridges or solve equations. I built things with my hands, fixed what was broken. My talents were practical, not cerebral. And Max? He was light years ahead of me, operating on a level I couldn't reach. At his parent-teacher conference, his math teacher, Mr. Walters, practically glowed as he talked about Max's potential. "He's got a natural gift," he said, holding up one of Max's tests, every answer neatly calculated and correct. "Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up at MIT or Stanford. He's got that kind of mind." I nodded, smiling tightly, but the words twisted something inside me. I wasn't jealous. I was proud of Max, I really was. But I couldn't ignore the gnawing thought that kept creeping back in. Where does he get this from? Because it sure as hell isn't me. Even his hobbies felt like a foreign language. While I'd grown up fixing bikes and tinkering with old radios, Max buried himself in sketchbooks and chess matches. I tried to connect with him, offering to teach him how to change the oil in the car or patch a leaky faucet, but he wasn't interested. "I'm not really into that kind of stuff, Dad," he'd say with an apologetic smile. I told myself it was just a generational thing. Kids these days had different interests, right? But the doubt had already taken root, and it was growing, deeper with every passing day. The turning point came at a family gathering. Anna's side of the family was over for Sunday dinner, the house buzzing with laughter and clinking glasses. Max was in the kitchen helping Anna with the dishes when her cousin Karen, always the one with a little too much wine in her, made one of her offhand comments. "Max is all Anna, isn't he?" she said, nodding toward the kitchen. "Those hazel eyes, that sharp jawline. Nothing of you in him, huh?" She laughed like it was a joke, but the words stuck to me like a burr. I forced a chuckle and shrugged it off, but inside I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. It wasn't. The first time someone had said it, but hearing it from Karen, so casually like it was obvious, made the doubt impossible to ignore. That night, I sat on the porch long after everyone had gone home, staring out at the dark lake. Anna came out to join me, a glass of wine in her hand. "You've been quiet tonight," she said, sitting down beside me. "Just tired," I lied. She looked at me for a long moment, her hazel eyes searching mine. "You sure?" I nodded, but I couldn't bring myself to meet her gaze. The truth felt like a weight pressing on my chest, but I wasn't ready to say it out loud. Not yet. In the days that followed, I started looking back on the years when Max was born, trying to piece together a timeline that made sense. The more I thought about it, the more cracks I saw in the picture-perfect memory I'd held on to for so long. There were the nights Anna came home late from work, her cheeks flushed and her excuses vague. "The meeting ran over," she'd say, slipping off her heels and pouring herself a glass of wine. At the time, I didn't think much of it. She was climbing the ladder at her job, and late nights were part of the deal. But now those memories felt off. Then there were the phone calls. I'd walk into the room, and she'd quickly end the call, saying it was just a coworker or her sister. I didn't question it back then. I trusted her. But now, looking back, I wondered if there was more to those calls than she'd let on. Even the way she'd acted during her pregnancy with Max seemed different in hindsight. She'd been more guarded, more focused on work than on the excitement of having our first child. I chalked it up to nerves at the time, but now I wasn't so sure. One evening, as I sat in the garage tinkering with the lawnmower, Emily wandered in, her stuffed bunny tucked under one arm. "What you doing, Dad?" she asked, her big brown eyes full of curiosity. "Just fixing this old thing," I said, smiling at her. She tilted her head, watching me work. "Do you think Max will help next time? He's really good at fixing stuff, too." Her words stopped me cold. Max didn't fix things. He didn't even like getting his hands dirty. "Why do you say that, kiddo?" She shrugged. "I don't know. Mommy said Max takes after her. That he's more like other people she knew when she was younger." Something in her innocent tone sent a chill through me. I set down the wrench and pulled her into my lap, holding her close. "Don't worry about it, sweetheart," I said, kissing the top of her head. But her words echoed in my mind long after she'd gone to bed. Other people she knew when she was younger. Who were those people? And what did they have to do with Max? That night, as I lay in bed beside Anna, the memories kept playing in my head like a broken record. The late nights, the phone calls, the way Karen's comment had hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into an abyss I couldn't ignore anymore. Anna stirred in her sleep, her hand brushing against mine. For a moment, I thought about waking her up, demanding answers. But what if I was wrong? What if I was just seeing shadows where there was nothing? I turned over, staring at the dark ceiling, the weight of my doubts pressing down on me. Whatever the truth was, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The thought wouldn't leave me alone. Day after day, it circled in my mind like a vulture, picking at every shred of doubt I had. I tried to push it down, tell myself I was being ridiculous, but no matter what I did, it kept coming back. There was only one way to know for sure, and the idea of it terrified me. But the not knowing, that was worse. One evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat in front of my computer, staring at the website for one of those home DNA test kits. My hand hovered over the mouse, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break through my chest. I couldn't believe I was even considering this. It felt like a betrayal, like crossing some invisible line I could never come back from. But I needed to know. The kit arrived in a discreet package a few days later. I tucked it under my arm, like it was some kind of contraband, and took it straight to the garage, where I ripped it open with shaky hands. The instructions were simple enough: swab, seal, send. But getting a sample, That was the tricky part. Max was a creature of habit, and I'd noticed he always left his toothbrush in the downstairs bathroom after brushing his teeth before bed. That night I waited until I was sure everyone was asleep, then crept downstairs like a thief. I grabbed the toothbrush, careful not to leave any sign I'd been there, and swabbed the bristles against the collection stick. When I sealed the envelope and dropped it into the mailbox the next morning, a strange mix of relief and dread washed over me. The wheels were in motion now, and there was no turning back. The waiting was unbearable. Every day I checked my email. Obsessively, my heart sank every time a new notification popped up. I threw myself into work, fixing things around the house, anything to keep my mind off the test. But it was always there, lurking in the back of my thoughts, like a shadow I couldn't shake. Anna noticed, of course. She always did. "You've been quiet lately," she said one evening as we sat on the couch. The kids were upstairs, and the house was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the TV. "Just tired," I said, avoiding her gaze. "Work getting to you?" "Something like that." She reached over and placed a hand on my arm, her touch warm and familiar. "You can talk to me, you know." I nodded, forcing a smile. "I know." She let it drop after that, but I could see the worry in her eyes. Anna wasn't the type to push, but I knew she could sense something was off. I just hoped she didn't suspect what it was. When the results finally came in, it felt like time stopped. I was sitting in the kitchen, my laptop open in front of me, the email glowing on the screen like a ticking time bomb. My hands shook as I clicked on it. My breath caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat. The words hit me like a freight train. "Max is not your biological son." I stared at the screen, willing the words to change, to disappear, to mean something else. But they didn't. The truth was right there in black and white, and there was no denying it. For a long time, I just sat there, numb. The world around me blurred, the sound of the clock ticking on the wall suddenly deafening. I felt like I was sinking, like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Max wasn't mine. The thought hit me again and again, each time like a punch to the gut. Every memory, every moment, every laugh we'd shared, it all felt like a lie. I'd spent 16 years raising a boy I thought was my son, and now I didn't even know who he was. I couldn't tell Anna. Not yet. I didn't even know how to begin. Instead, I started looking back, piecing together the fragments of my life, searching for answers. The name that kept coming back to me was Tom. Tom had been Anna's co-worker back when Max was born, a guy she'd mentioned more times than I could count. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. He was just a name, a face at the occasional work party, always smiling and charming in a way that seemed harmless. But now, with the results staring me in the face, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I remembered how Anna used to light up when she talked about him, the way she'd laugh at his jokes, how often she'd mention his advice or ideas. And then there were the late nights, the business trips, the times she'd come home smelling like expensive cologne that wasn't mine. It all felt so obvious now, like the pieces of a puzzle I'd been too blind to see. That night, as I lay in bed beside Anna, I couldn't stop replaying the past in my head. Every laugh, every kiss, every moment we'd shared felt tainted now, overshadowed by the possibility that she'd betrayed me. I watched her sleep, her face peaceful and unguarded, and felt a surge of anger and sadness that threatened to swallow me whole. Who was this woman I'd married? The mother of my children, the person I'd trusted more than anyone else in the world, was she capable of something like this? I didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was clear. I couldn't let this go. If Tom was the man I thought he was, if he was Max's real father, I needed to know. And when I did, Anna was going to have some explaining to do. When Anna mentioned her high school reunion, I barely reacted at first. She brought it up over breakfast one Saturday morning, casually flipping through her phone while the smell of Pancakes filled the kitchen. "Wouldn't it be fun to go?" she asked, her tone light. "It's been years since I've seen some of those people." I froze mid-sip of my coffee. My heart skipped a beat, and I set the mug down, careful to keep my voice neutral. "Sure, could be interesting." She looked up at me, her hazel eyes sparkling with excitement. "You'd really come with me?" I forced a smile and said, "Why not?" Inside, I was already on high alert. The reunion felt like an opportunity, maybe my only chance to get closer to the truth. The night of the reunion, Anna was radiant. She wore a fitted navy dress that hugged her figure, her hair cascading in soft waves over her shoulders. Watching her get ready, I couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia. She still looked so much like the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago, and for a moment, I wondered if I was making a mistake. But then I thought of Max, of the test results that had shattered my trust, and the doubt came flooding back. The drive to her old high school was quiet. Anna seemed relaxed, humming along to the radio, while I gripped the wheel, my thoughts racing. Was Tom going to be there? Would I finally get the answers I'd been searching for? When we arrived, the gymnasium had been transformed into a glittering party, with string lights and banners reading "Welcome Back, Class of 2009. The room buzzed with laughter and conversation, old friends catching up as if no time had passed. Anna was immediately swept into a group of former classmates, her laughter ringing out as she hugged people and exchanged excited greetings. I stayed, a step behind, scanning the room for any sign of Tom. As the evening wore on, I began to doubt myself. I hadn't seen anyone who matched the memory of Tom in my head. Maybe he hadn't shown up. Maybe this whole thing was a waste of time. But then I noticed something. Anna's demeanor shifted as she started talking to someone I didn't recognize. A man standing by the punch table, his posture slightly awkward, his suit a little too big. He had sandy brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of guy you'd pass on the street without a second glance. At first I didn't think much of it. But then Anna laughed, her hand brushing his arm lightly, and something about the way she looked at him made my hair stand on end. I moved closer, pretending to refill my glass of punch, and caught bits of their conversation. "Jake," she said, her voice warm. "I can't believe it's been so long. You haven't changed a bit." He smiled, a shy, lopsided grin that immediately caught my attention. There was something familiar about it, something I couldn't quite place. "It's good to see you, Anna," he said. "I wasn't sure if you'd be here." Their conversation continued, but I stopped listening. Instead, I found myself staring at Jake, my mind racing. His smile, his eyes, even the way he tilted his head when he spoke. It all felt eerily familiar. And then it hit me. Max. The resemblance was uncanny. I felt my chest tighten as I studied Jake's face, comparing it to Max's in my mind. The shape of the jaw, the slope of the nose. It was all there. I waited until Anna was distracted, chatting with another group of classmates before approaching Jake. "Hey," I said, extending a hand. "I'm Anna's husband." He smiled politely, shaking my hand. "Jake," he said, "nice to meet you." We stood there for a moment, an awkward silence hanging between us. Finally, I cleared my throat. "So, you and Anna were friends in high school?" Jake nodded, his expression softening. "Yeah, we were. Close." Something about the way he said it shocked me. "Close how?" I asked, keeping my tone light, but my eyes locked on his. He hesitated, glancing around as if looking for an escape. "We dated, briefly," he admitted, "but it was a long time ago. Nothing serious." I forced a chuckle, even as my pulse quickened. Funny. Anna never mentioned that. Jake shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his neck. "It was a long time ago," he repeated. "Ancient history. I nodded, but my mind was already spinning. Something about his nervous demeanor told me there was more to the story. Later that night, as the reunion wound down, I caught Jake alone near the coat rack. Anna was still saying her goodbyes, so I seized the moment. "Jake," I said, keeping my voice low, "can I ask you something?" He looked up, startled. Sure." 16 years ago," I began, my heart pounding. "Did you and Anna reconnect?" His face went pale. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, like he was trying to decide how much to say. Finally, he sighed. "Yes," he said quietly. "It was just one night. We hadn't seen each other in years, and I don't know. Things just happened." My blood turned to ice. "Did you know she was married?" Jake's eyes widened. "She didn't tell me," he said, quickly. "I swear I didn't know." "And you never found out?" He shook his head. "We didn't stay in touch. I had no idea." He trailed off, his gaze searching mine. "Why are you asking me this?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was racing, every nerve in my body screaming with the realization of what he'd just admitted. Jake didn't know. He had no idea that his brief fling with Anna had led to Max. But I knew. And now, I couldn't unsee it. Max wasn't mine. He was Jake's. The drive home from the reunion was suffocating. Anna was glowing, chatting about the night and how nice it had been to catch up with old friends. I barely heard her, my thoughts consumed by Jake's confession. His words echoed in my head like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. She had lied. About everything. About Max. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white as I tried to keep my emotions in check. Anna must have noticed the tension, because she fell silent, her gaze flickering toward me every so often. "You're quiet," she said softly, breaking the silence. I didn't respond. "Is something wrong?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "We'll talk when we get home." When we walked through the front door, the kids were already in bed, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Anna set her purse down on the counter and turned to me, her brows knitted with concern. "What's going on?" she asked. I took a deep breath, the weight of the truth pressing down on me. "I need to know something," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "And I need you to be honest with me." She blinked, confusion clouding her face. "Of course. What is it?" "Is Max mine?" The question hung in the air like a thunderclap. Anna's face went pale, her eyes widening in shock. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I did a DNA test," I said, my voice rising, "and the results came back. Max isn't my son." Her mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. For a moment I thought she might deny it, but then her shoulders sagged and she looked down at the floor. "Oh, God," she whispered. "Just tell me the truth, Anna," I said, my voice breaking. "I deserve that much." She nodded slowly, tears pooling in her eyes. "It was a long time ago," she began, her voice barely audible. "Before Max was born. I made a mistake." "Jake?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She hesitated, then nodded. "It was one night. I was going through a rough time. You were so busy with work, and I felt so alone. Jake and I ran into each other, and I don't know, I wasn't thinking. It just happened." I stared at her, the anger and betrayal boiling inside me, threatening to spill over. "You weren't thinking?" I snapped. "You weren't thinking about me? About us?" Tears streamed down her face now. "I know I hurt you, and I've regretted it every single day since. But I swear, I didn't know Max wasn't yours. I thought it was a mistake I could leave in the past." I sank into a chair at the kitchen table, my head in my hands. The weight of her confession was crushing, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. She sat across from me, her hands trembling as she wiped at her tears. "I love you," she said quietly. "And I love our family. What happened with Jake? It meant nothing. You're the one I chose. You're the one I've always chosen." I looked up at her, my eyes burning with unshed tears. "And Max?" I asked. "What about him? Does he know?" She shook her head. "No, he doesn't know anything. As far as he's concerned, you're his father. You've always been his father." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Despite everything, she was right. I had been there for Max every step of the way, teaching him how to ride a bike, cheering him on at his school plays, helping him with his homework. He wasn't just my son, he was my Max. But knowing the truth didn't make it hurt any less. The next morning, I sat Max down in the living room. He looked up at me, his hazel eyes so much like Jake's that it was almost unbearable. "Dad, is everything okay?" I took a deep breath, my hands shaking. "Max, I need to tell you something," I said. "And I want you to know that no matter what, it doesn't change how much I love you." His brows furrowed, confusion and worry flickering across his face. "Okay," I told him everything. The DNA test, the truth about Jake, the night that changed everything. He listened quietly, his expression unreadable, until I was finished. "So, you're not my biological dad?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "No," I said, my heart breaking at the pain in his eyes. "But I'm still your dad, Max. That's never going to change. You're my son, and I'll always be here for you. Always." For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then, slowly, he nodded, his eyes glistening with tears. "You're my dad," he said firmly. "You've always been my dad." The days that followed were a blur of raw emotion and difficult conversations. Anna and I sat down with Max, explaining everything as best we could. She promised to do whatever it took to rebuild the trust between us, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't easy. The betrayal still stung, and there were moments when I wasn't sure if I could move past it. But as I watched Anna and Max together, laughing over dinner or working on a puzzle in the living room, I realized that family isn't just about blood. It's about love, commitment, and the bonds you build over time. Months later, as I stood on the porch watching the sunset over the lake, Anna joined me, slipping her hand into mine. "Do you think we'll be okay?" she asked quietly. I looked at her, my heart heavy but steady. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I'm willing to try." And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe we could find our way back to each other, one step at a time. And now, as I sit here sharing this with you, I keep wondering, did I do the right thing? Was it right to dig up the past and risk tearing my family apart? Or should I have let it all stay buried, kept living the life I thought was perfect? I don't know if there's a right answer, but maybe you do. Tell me, what would you have done?